Hello and a warm welcome to Curious, the Royal Society of Edinburgh's summer programme. The Royal Society of Edinburgh is Scotland's national academy and its motto is Knowledge Made Useful. This year the RSE events offer insights from some of the world's leading experts across 4 key themes: health and well-being, innovation and invention, our planet, and COVID-19, living within a pandemic. This year's programme also comprises tea and talk events, a format inspired by the coffee house discussions of the Scottish Enlightenment. These are free and they take place on Zoom. There are also many other panel discussion webinars on a wide range of subjects, so please do visit www.rse-curious.com to have a look at the programme and book. I'm Robyn Marsack, a Fellow of the RSE, and I'm delighted to be joined today by fellow Victoria Crowe and Christine De Luca. I don't think either of them would describe themselves as world experts, yet of course they are both very distinguished in their respective fields of painting and poetry. Victoria studied at Kingston School of Art and the Royal College of Art, London, before being invited to join the Edinburgh College of Art in 1968, where she taught drawing and painting until 1998. She's had over 50 solo shows, has been awarded numerous distinctions, and her work is held in a large number of public and private collections worldwide. She lives and works in the Scottish borders, and when she can, in Venice. She's been described as one of the most vital and original figurative painters currently at work in Scotland. Christine writes poetry and prose in English and Shetlandic, her mother tongue. She was the energetic Edinburgh Macca, or Poet Laureate of the city, from 2014 to 2017. Her work's been translated into French, Italian and Nordic languages. Her 8th collection, Vive, is out from Marsack FRSE this summer. She has been my guide into a living language of vitality and depth, writes Tom Powell, and Shetland writer Jim Mainland remarks that her can-do candour is the perfect pick-me-up for these cautious and emerging times. In this event, The World Shrinks to a Window Pane, we will be exploring some of the curious themes through art and poetry created only last year. We might think of them as gestures of defiance against the circumstance which held so much back in our lives. Another Time, Another Place was an exhibition of 12 paintings by Victoria Crowe made throughout 2020 in response to our changed world and to the year-long disruption of her artistic practice due to illness and recovery. The visual images engendered by these experiences were further explored when she invited Christine De Luca to respond to them with poems. Their collaborative venture reflects on our changed circumstances, the search for meaning and transcendence, and acknowledges the frailty of our interconnected ecology. The resulting book, Another Time, Another Place, a beautiful book, was published by the Scottish Gallery, and you'll find a link to that in the chat box. Now the collaboration has become the springboard too for a musical response, courtesy of the Michael Cadogan Trust, and there's a link to that as well. In this event, we'll be looking at some of the paintings, listening to Christine's readings of the accompanying poems, and reflecting on the works and the process of collaboration. We'd be glad to have your questions, so please do submit those at whatever point they occur to you using the Q&A function. 2 final points before we begin with a short film that will introduce the paintings and the poems. This event is being recorded and will be made available on the RSE's YouTube channel in due course. And if you require subtitles, you can turn these on using the otter.ai function at the top of the Zoom screen. We're going to begin with a short film made by the Edinburgh Film Company.
Rowans on a darkening slope sink into soft shadow. They stand stripped as skeletons to shivering nudity. It could be late afternoon when light on the tree adjusts our compass, finds true north, when the lawn is a sundial, catching shadow till each beam is smudged with dusk. Snow folded into contours, sifted and snagged at the zigzag of old walls. Trees were scant shelter in the whip of wind.
This group of paintings really began their existence based on two events that happened in 2019. On the one hand, I had this big exhibition, this retrospective exhibition at the City Arts Centre, which was my whole sort of life's work laid out before me. And then on the other hand, I had a serious illness diagnosed, and so I had this weird balancing thing of, okay, so this is your life in painting, but then there's this balancing thing of a brush with mortality. And it was like a sort of, almost like a Greek myth, this strange coming together of the very positive and the possibly very negative aspects of life. And so when the COVID lockdown happened, it gave me a great chance to sort of get back into my work without any social distractions. And at the same time, I think everybody felt changed by that. I certainly did. And I couldn't sort of simply go back to where I had been a year before. So I think the work changed quite a lot. I was, in the sense that it was sort of quite a tentative beginning. And I'd read somewhere that you have to look for the profound outside your window. And that's really what I did over that period of time. And the landscape, the experience of working in the landscape became more and more intense, really. I suppose partly because visual things happened, like the night skies became very, very clear because of the lack of pollution. And the silence in the village where we lived was quite sort of profound because of no traffic. So the paintings really started off by reflecting that changed world, almost as if I was looking at it anew, totally from the beginning. And it seemed to me that I was stepping over into a place I'd not been before in the paintings. And that kind of intensity grew within that group of work. I've always been interested how another art form can bring a different dimension. Seeing how Christine had worked with some of the paintings in the retrospective exhibition, it became apparent that she could encapsulate in words a feeling that I was kind of groping for in paint. And she brought some unexpected sort of resonances to it, and I was delighted when she felt that she wanted to explore the starting points of some of these paintings. There are lovely phrases that she uses, like she talks about a tree being somewhere between certainty and eternity. She talks about the axis of the world turning. She talks about Venus rising again the next morning. All of these things I was aware of, but I couldn't actually literally paint about. But it's the subtext that she picked up, which I think has been a great extension to the ideas.
Snow covers her garden, her world. It has lain long enough to make a history. Its stains and variousness marble the ground. Paths blurred, the way ahead unsure. The trees bear wintered souls, bend to the stroke of a friendly hand. She needs to test her strength, her skill. Theirs is a hushed exchange of trust. The hazel is her talisman. Her touchstone is the larch. The pencil is perceptive, lends lightness to the task, seems to know where to go in all that snow. It cuts through oil, adds to the frosty patina, picks out contortions, twists, frizzles of twigs. A canvas would have soaked up too much energy, demanded vigour. It will have to wait a little longer, till snow melts and the horizon clears. Meanwhile, this is release, a start.
Thank you so much for that. It's a beautiful film and gives us, I think, some sense of how these paintings work as a set and as a collaborative endeavour. And could you tell us a little bit about the process of that collaboration? Was it something that accompanied the work, or did it strike you at the end that this is what you'd like to do, Victoria? And you've said in the film a little bit about why, but you might want to expand on that.
Yes, well, I think I was really very, very intrigued when 5 poets were writing about the work in the retrospective. And when I was sort of halfway through this bunch of work, I thought it would be really nice just to have another voice, to see if some other creative person could encapsulate what I was trying to do in paint. And I sent Christine a couple of images, and she immediately responded with a poem. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. Do you think you could look at the starting points of some of the others? And this is what we did. And it was during lockdown, so we couldn't meet. Christine couldn't see the poems. We just corresponded through sort of iPad contact and built up this lovely conversation about not just the finished image, but the kind of subtext, which is what she's so good at.
So Christine, in your role as Edinburgh Macker, you were commissioned to write on certain themes, I know, and there's a long tradition of what's called ekphrastic poetry. That's poets providing a description of or a reflection on a work of art. A famous example would be Keats on a Grecian urn. So how difficult is it to respond to a work that's chosen for you, and indeed which you couldn't actually go to see, as Victoria said?
Sorry. I'll think about the latter point first. It certainly helps hugely if you can see the painting in terms of the texture and even just the scale of it. Yeah. But in the Mackership, I have to say, sometimes I got some strange things I had to do, and it was quite difficult to rev up and get moving and think, what on earth can I write about this? And so that first sort of normal impulse to write a poem wasn't there. But with Victoria's paintings, I didn't have that barrier. I was immediately, something would, strike me right away. And I was, I didn't really have to short circuit anything at all. It was straightforward in that respect. The first thing, of course, is just a kind of a wordlessness, I think. Just letting go of words and letting go of rational thought and just letting yourself seep into this image and just be absorbed, let your subconscious just be absorbed in it and just let go. And that seemed to happen quite quickly, I think, with these paintings. So it really wasn't a struggle in that respect. It was a struggle in other ways, but not in that way, no.
A struggle in the way that writing is always a struggle. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, we're going to look at some of the work specifically, beginning with the detail of painting, then the whole painting beside a poem, and we'll hear Christine reading it. So could we start, please, with Frostlight?
Frostlight. 1. It could be morning in late winter. Everything is as before, yet this light is today's and no other's. It paints the twigs as it did yesterday, but the earth has since inclined enough to lay a timely gleam on that particular branch, that patch of grass. Thin sunlight suffuses distance, sifts centuries. In its rays, something almost mystical, infiltrates, seeps into slumbering cells, stirs renewal, a sense of making. 2. It could be late afternoon, when light on the tree adjusts our compass, finds true north. When the lawn is a sundial, catching shadow till each beam is smudged with dusk. Tomorrow the sun will be higher, all is familiar, in place. How come it seems like a yet undiscovered world?
Thanks, Christine. I wanted to begin with this because Christine's poem in its last lines sets the question that the title of the book and the exhibition, Another Time, Another Place, echoes. She wrote, as you heard, all is familiar, in place. How come it seems like a yet undiscovered world? And Victoria, that you touched on that in the film. You know, this series was the world through a window pane. It's very familiar backyard, as it were, backyard territory for you. So was it really a decision that you felt was forced on you by lockdown and illness, or actually was it a long-held ambition to paint from that window?
It wasn't a long-held ambition to paint from that window. No, I think what happened, because my sort of physical strength was at a low ebb at the beginning of this group of work, the outside was intensely seen through the windows. And also I found that in my daughter's bedroom upstairs, I got a different perspective on things. So I could look down on the garden and across at this hill in a way I'd never really thought about doing before. Some of them were sort of eye level, like this piece that's still on the screen. They were eye level, but there was this intensity of light that I'd never really had the time to look at and to contemplate from the seclusion of within. I'm usually outside doing drawing and kind of taking the messages back with me. This one was very much seeing it there, framed, having time to look at it, and to explore a very fleeting moment, which I think, because of not being fully functional as an artist at that point, I was hanging on to the intensity of the moment. And that's really what fed into the rest of the series of paintings.
Christine, was that the first image that you were offered, or perhaps not? Because when you write about a sense of renewal, and here the branches are bare and they're tangled and the sun is blurred, so your sense of renewal is quite an optimistic thought. And I wonder, I think that's characteristic of your personality, but did you already have a sense of the whole, the way this series was moving, or was this your first encounter?
No, I didn't have a sense of how it was going at all. I think this was one of the earlier ones, but I think it was, the overall was the first thing in this one I was feeling, that amazingly warming sky set against this frosty tree in the foreground. And it made me think, I suppose, of the hiatus, the dormant state. There's something lovely about the dormant state when you know that the sap is going to rise, the buds are going to come. It's like being at a concert and the orchestra's tuned up, and you're either waiting for the conductor or you're waiting for the conductor's baton just to go. There's a moment there, and it was that kind of tension, I think, between this warming sky and this still frosted earth that kind of struck me first of all. But that made the kind of renewal sense to me. And then this final part of the poem, the marvel of the familiar, and yet this strangeness. And in a way, we're just strangers to ourselves, I think. That kind of sense of being blown away by something which is quite familiar.
That's great. Could we have the next one, The Amazing Clarity of the Night Skies, please? This painting's got an extraordinary intensity of colour. You call it Lapis Lazuli, Christine. And we've moved here into April, but you're looking back on it from November in the poem. So could we hear that?
Amazing clarity of the night skies. Lines written on All Souls' Day. A night-soaked sky slips into lapis lazuli, fights the final incandescence of that April sun. The days then, unseasonally dry and sunny, were full of news, spooling numbers of the dead. On All Souls, there is consolation in candlelight. This backcloth has a biblical feel, an immensity, entreating us to read its signs and portents, its waxing crescent moon, its pinprick Venus at her brightest, nailed to the firmament, held as we are, spellbound in the moment. On the skyline, trees are bold yet insubstantial, real but ethereal. Below, the woods are a mystery to themselves, a web alive to secret processes of awakening. Days flow into night, flow into day, flow into eternity. What will stay? Tomorrow, careless of posterity, the heavens will have tilted, and Venus will rise early in the chill of morning.
Christine, of course, that April 2020 was a gift to us, wasn't it? Well, here in Scotland anyway, all those days of sunshine, which were in a sense spellbinding in themselves to us in that moment, which was often a moment of an agonizing moment. So why did you choose to pair it with All Souls Day, which is, of course, the beginning of November and darkness?
Yes. Well, Victoria was seeing it in April and painting it some time later than that. And I got the poem, I think it was the first one you sent, Victoria?
Yeah, that's right.
Late October. And by the time I was writing the poem, we were getting into early November, and I suddenly saw it was All Souls. And when she'd been seeing it in April, there was more than 1,000 deaths a day from the pandemic. And when I was writing it, we were into the next wave. And it was, again, huge numbers of people dying. Every day, every news bulletin had this. So it just sort of seemed appropriate somehow to link it to that, to think about the dead,
Yes.
to remember them.
Yeah. And Victoria, I know that Christine's poem, when you got it, caused you to do a little bit of repainting. Am I right?
Yes, you are. When I saw this image back in April, the village was silent, traffic had stopped, aircraft noise had stopped. There was this amazing luminous sky, and it was held with this little waxing moon with Venus right at the top. You can still see it in this slide, right at the top right. And the sort of artificial light of a roadway through the village, completely silent. And as Christine said, I saw this first in April, but of course I couldn't draw it at night. I couldn't see it. So a lot of the drawings and research for this had to be done through the day. And then this intense image remembered. And one of the reasons that this image, I think, works very well is the abstract composition. So we have this huge expanse of sky and this tiny point right at the top, which gives really deep feeling about the kind of almost sort of exceptionally miraculous event of this luminous sky with the moon. And I wrote to Christine about all of this, saying that, yes, I wanted to have a waxing moon at the top. It's very sort of elemental painting. And as I say, it was these abstract elements that are so important. But I'm not very good at telling my left from my right. And when I drew the moon, a sort of diagram of what I'd seen, I kept saying to myself, right, it's not C for cat, it's the other way. Or did I say it was C for cat? And anyway, whatever happened, when I came to paint it, I'd looked it up on the internet, what a waxing moon and a waning moon looked like, and I painted it the wrong way around. So the first draft I had back from Christine was talking about a waning moon, and that gave a whole different subtext to it. So the little bit of repainting that only a few people knew about, but no, now a lot more people would know about, was repainting the angle of the moon above. Yeah.
Well,
when I mention, I mean, I think this poem, this painting has a kind of sublime feeling, a real spiritual dimension, and I'd rather look at it than look at the Sistine Chapel.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Christine. I agree with you about the sublime element, and the intensity of the colors is so wonderful. And the poem says, what will stay? What will stay? And I just wanted to touch on that role here of memory, Victoria, because, well, for a start, you had to do, as you say, the drawings during the day and then think about the color when you could come back in and paint it, that night color, which you had to paint during the day. But is memory, do you carry a memory of paintings with you as well? It's just that particular gold, I have to include, I have to say that beautiful gold ground just reminds me of the light in Samuel Palmer's paintings. And you know how poets borrow sometimes a little line from other people. I wonder whether painters ever borrowed something, even something like a patch of color, or kept that memory of paintings with them.
I think I don't, I mean, I've got a very good visual memory, so the actual memory of that astonishing night, I can remember very, very clearly. I can still see it now. And although I acknowledge other artists who've dealt with similar twilight themes, what the memories are my feelings in response to them, not the actual visual images themselves. So it's one step removed from another visual image. It's much more, I remember feeling like that when I looked at, I don't know, Turner or something. How does this now become my image? How can I make that happen? And so I have to rely on internal memories, reflections, historical sort of experiences, I suppose. And those are the references rather than that I've recognized in other artists' work, rather than the other artists' work themselves.
That's really interesting. And other people may have questions on this point or other points, so don't forget to enter your questions in the question and answer box. The next slide we're going to look at is November Stillness.
November stillness, a puff of smoke. In the woods, young owls have left, and the old pair call only to each other. They glide silently out of nowhere. Nightlife abounds in undergrowth. Light fades behind the hill. Evening fires are lit. A plume of wood smoke lingers in the chill. There will be stars, perhaps a memory, a trace of fireworks. Children have been cajoled from cold windows in attic rooms. They drift off under coombe ceilings. Only the owl is vigilant, slipping beyond stillness.
Thank you. This is one of the paintings that suggests human habitation beyond your own, Victoria. And is the house part of the painting simply because you can see it? Or is there more to this inclusion than meets the eye, as it were?
I think it goes back to that point of the memory that a visual image stirs is often associated with a personal experience. So in this case, it's very much almost a childhood experience of a lit window and looking out at the night from the safety of within. And one of the kind of absolute gifts for this was of course, the puff of smoke, because it animated the whole of that background, where in Christine's poem, she talks about the kind of nightlife and the continual ongoing of the trees, the plants, the animals there. But this puff of smoke defines a human presence, and it lingers with an incredible intensity just for a little while. And so that, juxtaposed to this kind of childhood memory of a cold window, is very much why that is there, and identifying, I think, with other people that were going through this extraordinary sort of isolation. You maybe just saw, you know, we all clapped for the NHS against a lighted window. You know, if we couldn't go out on the streets, we clapped from the windows. So it was this kind of contact as well.
Christine, you've introduced an owl into your poem, and you've got the children up in the attic. So I wonder whether this aspect of other lives, the human lives and bird life, was something you discussed together, or was it something that you beautifully invented?
I think we'd talked a little bit about childhood and things like that, which is lovely. And that's the fireworks and so on. November sort of reminds you of things like that. But to be honest, this was the most difficult one for me in some ways, because from a photograph, it was very, very difficult to see because it's immensely dark. It's a beautiful painting when you're up close, but from a photograph, you really can't see the detail. So I was a little bit stuck, but I was wanting to get this feeling of silence and stillness. And to me, the owl is the most silent of all birds. They just float past you and make no noise at all. So I thought I would maybe introduce that, because there will be much life in there that you can't see. But yes, we did talk a little bit about childhood, and so that kind of comes into the poem. But I suppose it's maybe the most narrative of the poems. And that's something that words can do. You can add a narrative to something which, you know, in a painting. And Victoria was very good about that. She didn't ban it.
I haven't even thought to ask you whether you disagreed about something, but actually, yes, I will come on to that, in fact. So can we move on now to On the Cusp, please?
On the cusp, embers of sun copper the branches, earthing rods that ground us, linking land to sky. They arc upwards with a boldness, red and fierce out of the murk. They are alive, ablaze. Perhaps there is burning further away, in canyons beyond that benevolent watershed, beyond the rim of trees shriveling on its lip. Boundaries are soft and indistinct. A lochan could find equilibrium in blue infused with coral, or a roof glint coldly as it douses flaming light. A maple endures, daringly propitious, fully charged to shape a brighter future.
Victoria, this and another couple of paintings share an almost shocking palette, if we could go back to that, and what I'd call an incendiary brightness, and Christine's picked up on that with her mention of blazing in canyons further away. There were, of course, massive wildfires last year in Australia and Turkey, in California, even in Scotland on a much smaller scale because it was so dry in April. So in this and some of the other pictures, were you thinking about the planet we live on in such a live off, actually, in such a spendthrift way often when you were painting these?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't help but think of burning images. And I wanted to root them into my own experience. I didn't want to make a painting about a bushfire in Australia. I wanted to think about how the sort of experience we may have of that intensity of light, which could be a low winter sun. You know, when you're looking into low winter sun, it can have that sort of scarlet feeling behind it. I wanted it to ask a question as well. Is it fire? Is it sunlight? Are we as a society so interchanged and held together that what happens, there is no over there anymore. It's over here too. What we experience, what's happening with the bushfires, with the terrible fires that are happening again now, it's all interconnected. The pandemic, the isolation, all of these things have a connection. So I wanted to allude to that, but not to make it specifically painting of a fire. I want to leave that up to what people, when people come to the painting, I want them to think about it. You said before that Christine's probably an optimist, and I think that's very, very true. I think she does put an optimistic slant on it sometimes. And it was about devastation. But the interesting thing is that in the period when I was really quite ill and couldn't work, I had started diagnosis, I'd started the drawing of this maple with this intense fiery growth. And it wasn't until after the treatment that I completed the maple painting. And so in a way, it was my sort of a salvation for me. It was the thing that I held on to. So in a way, Christine's quite right. It was my talisman. The thing that got me through. So there is an optimism there as well, Christine. But let's think about it. Let's keep thinking about it.
Well, I'd like to contrast it with the white trees in Luminous Trees. So can we look at that slide, please?
Luminous tree, rowans on a darkening slope sink into soft shadow. They stand stripped as skeletons to shivering nudity. The youngest loom, pale and defenceless, barely aware that sap will rise. It is as if the moon has lapsed. Earth slipped her guard, till even the solidity of trees is in question. If we look away, will they fade, seep into deeper distance? If we breathe, will they give up the ghost? Only Scots pine has stayed as sentinel, kept faith, resilient. They brush the skyline, holding tints of dusk that illumine, hint at hope, return, rebirth.
So in both those poems, Christine, you're looking for signs of hope and return. And the previous one on the cusp, I thought that was, a sign of destruction, as Victoria mentioned too, but you've taken the opposite turn. So is that a very determined view on your part?
Well, I think I was very struck at the beginning with these striking maple branches. They just seemed so alive and so electrified. And Victoria had mentioned about this other painting she'd done with them. So that was the first that came to me. And then as I looked further in, to me, it could be either the beautiful, benevolent sunset or the fires. So I kind of opened that up a little bit. But there are actually quite a lot of negative words in the poem. Fierce, murk, shriveling and douse. I mean, I had thought that was a little loch, and trying to see in a photograph what this was, this bluish surface, and infused with coral, the light from the fires or the sun. And of course, it was, Vicky said then afterwards, it was actually a roof seen from her daughter's bedroom window. So I just kind of left the suggestion of the loch in there. But actually the other poem, which we're not doing today, which is Conflagration, which is a very, very intense bush in bright red. That one it says, or is this merely the sun setting, lighting the old hazel, warming its twisted bones? It has given all, once more laid down its fruits and foliage, a healing tree for a wounded world. And another bit, these are no games. In our mind's eye, fire encroaches coming our way. So I think that other poem is a little bit more, perhaps, a conflagration. And if I had been writing on the cusp this year with more of these intense fires, perhaps I would have been a little bit less optimistic.
But in this, looking at this white tree, you talk about ghosts of trees and thinking about whether the sap, have people given up the ghost, and do they think the sap will rise? And I suppose that too is thinking in a broader sense, not only of renewal in the natural world or in our environment, but in ourselves too. The steadiness of trees, but also the lack of breath. Which you mentioned.
And the fragility of the environment, the fragility of ourselves, our bodies as well. Yeah. It's almost too beautiful, that one, to look at.
Yeah, I certainly don't think of it as a skeletal tree. I think of it very much as an enduring tree, something that has got, if you like, the spirit of a tree within it. Mm-hmm. In this situation, I see it as quite a hopeful thing.
Good.
Thank you. Let's go on to Making All Things New, which is perhaps my favourite of these paintings.
Making all things new, the world shrinks to a window pane, holds its breath. Morning light, a hesitant revelation, infiltrates a fretwork of branches, warms the sky to a pearly scumble. To the right, an echo, a refrain, but nose to the glass, a cold fumble, a once upon a time prospect, obscure, half frosted, an inner world, unsure. We stumble onwards, occasionally surprised by a clarity we thought lost, or mesmerized by a reflection of a world made new.
It's a very resonant title, the world, Making All Things New, from Revelations, also a resonant word in this context. And would you agree that, in a nutshell, that's what art does for us, with painting or poetry, making all things new? But it's not necessarily a comforting making new. So how would you relate the practice of art, visual or verbal art, to well-being? Is it a comfort for us? Is it a solace, or is it something else? Victoria?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Right at the beginning of lockdown, I was wondering how art could actually make society a better place, how we could contribute to a sense of well-being is such an overused word, but contribute to a sense of things being okay. And I was reading a piece by a writer called Olivia Laing, who had become increasingly, over the last year or so, increasingly worried about rise of the far right, about the pandemic, about the nuclear wars, civil disturbance, terrorism, all these things, which she felt she had a dearth of time to actually process. And she said that looking at a painting, time stopped for her. Reading a novel, you suddenly begin to see patterns and consequences that you couldn't possibly see. And there's a lovely quote that has been a sort of really very important to me. Art has begun to feel not like a respite or escape, i.e. not just a pleasant feeling that comforts us, but a formidable tool for getting perspective on an increasingly difficult time. And I think that's very much what I hope these paintings, and this painting perhaps in particular, does. It gives us a chance to think, chance to reflect. It's seen in a mirror anyway. And it gives us that time to process and to question. And I think that's all we can hope to do, really.
Christine, would you agree with that?
Yes, very much so. Yes, it's beyond something that's just aesthetically pleasing. It's purposeful, and this one in particular, I think, helps. I mean, the kind of image, I suppose, of mental health and being things being obscure and you're held back and held in and locked up and the world is all wrong, and then there's this kind of melting and these reflections and just allowing yourself to see things in a different way and being released from this lockdown. So I think there is something there in the actual structure of this painting, which is quite a healing thing in some ways.
Well, could we have the last one now? The last pair we're going to look at is light and reflection from within.
Light and reflection from within, all is familiar. An opaled snow lawn gleaming, the tilt of plant pot, old seat, bushes stripped and stark, shrugged down to gather vigour. Beyond, in deepening dusk, all but a witch hazel dims. The golden bush, about to flower, exudes an inner glow, its smoulder. Nothing is out of place, but sudden, as if transfixed in light that seeps through inner doors ajar. Kaleidoscopes on white, its strafing beams encountering the dark. Edges smudge and soften, become indistinct. Can we tell what lies beyond? Where merging into something bigger and unknown, shards of brightness startle and the sky forever holds its mystery. The artist slips into the room, and though her look is far away, to recesses of herself, she confronts ungentle places, ponders her image of this moment's astonishment, but like the bush, unaware, bears a quiet radiance, that inner spark, elemental as the stars.
I'd like to ask you about the window itself, Victoria. I was looking at a catalogue of romantic painting, exploring the motif of the open window, and a curator drew attention to the window as a liminal space where we stand between the interior and the outside world. And in some of the paintings, there's no sense of a separating window pane. But here we see the window shadows and we see yourself tucked away and looking out. And could you tell us about painting this, which in the book, it's the last of the series?
Yes, in many ways it was the most difficult to paint because I'm in it. And for a long time, it was simply the view out of the window at night with the shadows from inside hitting the snow outside and the reflections of open doorways and lights hitting on the window pane. And I thought of a title quite early on, and the title was Light from Within, and then it became Light and Reflection from Within. And I realized that what that was really meaning was light from within myself, light from my own understanding. And so in a way, the painting became about all I had remembered, all I had experienced, all the things that I was seeing, not just physical things, memories, life events. They became held in that sort of image of myself against this. You were talking about a liminal space. I think these liminal spaces are where we can really explore metaphorical and symbolic realities, which are much, much more meaningful than simply straightforward physical representations. So that very, very complex painting, and I mentioned this to Christine, I was quite sort of embarrassed almost to show it. And yet it was demanding very strongly to be shown. And it was, in a way, after that experience of as I mentioned before, experience of mortality, experience of the lockdown. I had to come out from behind the canvas and say, yes, here I am, and this is me, these are my thoughts, these are my concepts, and to accept everything and to be aware of everything in my life up to that point. So it was a difficult one.
Thank you. I'm just going to take one question here from our audience, and I'm used to poetry readings, you know, and I know that when an audience is held pretty spellbound, and I suspect that the audience out there is spellbound by both images and words, but somebody has asked Victoria whether this viewing, this perspective from the window also has something in common with your Jenny pictures, with your shepherd pictures. Would you think it does?
That's interesting, because we were recently clearing out the loft and I was looking back at some of those, and often she appears outside of a window, or she appears reflected in a mirror. And I realized that what I've been doing all these years is actually trying to find the space which isn't a realistic space. So I think the answer to that question is yes, there certainly are connections, and I'm perhaps only just now beginning to fully realize them.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that question. Well, I'm going to close with a brief question of my own to both of you, if I may. And that is, well, actually, they're quite large questions, but if you can be brief, that will be good. So these paintings and the poems were made in the circumstances of the worldwide pandemic. Is there something that you've learned over that time that you want to keep hold of? And is there something that is prompting you to change? And that there might be aspects of the same answer. Christine.
Well, to hold on to, I think maybe like Victoria, the inner life, I think, the chance to reflect, to take time to do that. Certainly I would want to hold on to that, not to rush so much in my life. And this idea of seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, which is just so true, really. I don't know if there's anything more I need to say there, but
those are things that you want to keep hold of, and are a change in the sense that you've had them already, but you've developed them during
this more this intensity of experience, I think, and being prepared to go with it and enjoy it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christine. Victoria.
Well, I think very much the same. I think one of the things that I have learned is that we are so interconnected, that all the problems that the planet is facing affect every single one of us. There are connections there. We have to work very, very hard at addressing these things. And on a personal level, I think these sort of strange areas of, for example, twilight or melt or dawn or the lifting of mist or the intensity of light, the changing clarity. It does a funny thing to your mind. It unsettles the intellect, but it opens up the imagination to metaphor and to symbol. And to me, that's a far greater understanding of a situation than physically recording it. So I think those are the things I would take away.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And I think people will want to take away those thoughts with them too. So thank you very much for joining us today to see and hear the work of Victoria Crowe and Christine De Luca. And thank you for your question. Thank you to Kate and Hannah at the FRSE team that made this possible. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about this collaboration as much as I have. And again, let me recommend the book. And remember, you can find a link to that in the chat, available from the Scottish Gallery. Do look up Curious too, and make the most of what the FRSE has to offer in its programme. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robyn.
Goodbye now.